Thursdays, nigga. I dressed my mama up, y'all.
Walk out cute in your darn shoes. I ain't got time for that though.
The alarm clock buzzed at 5:30 a.m. on March 21st, 2025, just as it had every weekday for the past 3 years. But something was different about Destiny Stewart that morning. As she moved through her Jackson, Mississippi apartment, there was a lightness in her step that hadn't been there in months. Her movements carried a quiet confidence, a sense of purpose that seemed to radiate from within. Destiny stood before her bathroom mirror, carefully applying the minimal makeup she preferred for her shifts at Pine Forest Health and Rehabilitation. Her reflection showed a 27-year-old woman who had recently discovered something many people spend their entire lives searching for: the courage to choose herself. The dark circles under her eyes, once permanent fixtures from sleepless nights filled with anxiety and uncertainty, had begun to fade. Her smile, when it appeared, reached her eyes again. She pulled her long hair back into the practical ponytail required for her work as a certified nursing assistant, securing it with the same purple hair tie she'd used for weeks. Purple had always been her favorite color, a small detail that somehow felt more significant lately. Everything felt more significant lately. The way sunlight streamed through her kitchen window as she prepared her lunch seemed brighter. The way her scrubs felt as she put them on seemed less like a uniform and more like armor. Protection for someone ready to face the world on her own terms. As Destiny gathered her belongings, she paused at a framed photo on her nightstand. It wasn't there anymore. She'd packed it away 2 weeks earlier, along with several other reminders of a chapter she was finally ready to close. The empty space where it once sat no longer felt like a void. Instead, it felt like possibility. Her coworkers at Pine Forest had noticed the change immediately. Linda, the charge nurse who'd worked alongside Destiny since she started, mentioned it during their last shift together. "You seem different," she'd observed while they were restocking supplies in the medication room. "Lighter somehow, like you're not carrying the weight of the world anymore." Destiny had simply smiled and continued organizing the cabinet, but Linda's words had stayed with her. She was different. For the first time in longer than she cared to remember, she was making decisions based on what she wanted, not what someone else expected of her. The relief was intoxicating. Even the elderly residents had picked up on her renewed energy. Mrs. Patterson, 89-year-old woman with dementia who rarely spoke, had reached for Destiny's hand during medication rounds the previous Tuesday. "You look happy, sweet girl," she'd whispered, her cloudy eyes surprisingly clear in that moment. "Whatever you did, it was the right thing." The 20-minute drive to Pine Forest that morning felt different too. Instead of the usual knot of dread that had accompanied her commute for months, Destiny found herself humming along to the radio. She'd even treated herself to coffee from the gas station on Forest Avenue, a small luxury she'd recently decided she deserved. As she pulled into the employee parking lot at Pine Forest Health and Rehabilitation, Destiny took a moment to appreciate the spring morning. March in Mississippi could be unpredictable, but today the weather matched her mood. Mild, promising, full of potential. She gathered her purse and lunch bag, checking her reflection one last time in the rearview mirror. The change in her had been gradual at first, then sudden. Like watching a sunrise, imperceptible, until suddenly the entire sky is painted gold. Her family had noticed it during their last Sunday dinner together. Her best friend Sarah had commented on it during their weekly phone call. Even the mailman had mentioned that she seemed to be smiling more when he saw her in the mornings. What none of them knew, what Destiny herself was still getting used to, was how freedom felt when you finally claimed it. How standing up for yourself, even when it's terrifying, can transform everything about the way you move through the world. As she walked toward the entrance of Pine Forest, her ID badge swaying from the lanyard around her neck, Destiny Stewart had no way of knowing that this ordinary Thursday morning would become extraordinary for all the wrong reasons. She had no way of knowing that the peace she'd fought so hard to find was about to be shattered in the very parking lot she just left behind. But in this moment, walking through those doors for what would be the final time, Destiny Stewart was exactly who she'd always dreamed of being: free. Before we continue with Destiny's story, we want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from around the world. And here's a question we'd love your thoughts on. Have you ever made a life-changing decision that felt both terrifying and liberating at the same time? Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is choose ourselves, even when we don't know what comes next. Destiny Stewart didn't choose nursing by accident. While other kids her age were dreaming of fame or fortune, she found herself drawn to the quiet heroism of caregiving. Growing up in Jackson, she'd spent countless hours visiting her grandmother at various care facilities, watching how some staff members rushed through their duties while others took time to truly see the people in their care. Even as a teenager, Destiny knew which kind of caregiver she wanted to become. Her path to becoming a certified nursing assistant had been deliberate and purposeful. While the program was demanding, requiring both technical knowledge and emotional resilience, Destiny excelled in ways that surprised even her instructors. She had an intuitive understanding of what patients needed beyond their prescribed medications and scheduled treatments. Her clinical supervisor noted in her evaluation that Destiny possessed an uncommon ability to connect with patients across all demographics and conditions. At Pine Forest Health and Rehabilitation, this gift became her signature. The facility housed over 80 residents, ranging from post-surgical recovery patients to individuals requiring long-term memory care. While many CNAs developed preferences for working with certain populations, Destiny moved seamlessly between units, equally comfortable assisting a 45-year-old stroke patient with physical therapy exercises and sitting with a 95-year-old woman who could no longer recognize her own children. Her approach went far beyond the clinical requirements of her position. While other staff members focused on completing their assigned tasks efficiently, Destiny understood that dignity was often found in the smallest details. She learned the names of residents, children, and grandchildren, remembered which patients preferred their coffee black versus with cream, and knew exactly which television programs brought comfort during lonely afternoons. Mr. Henderson, a retired teacher who'd been at Pine Forest for 8 months following a fall, once told his daughter that Destiny was the only staff member who still spoke to him like he was a person rather than a problem to be solved. She would ask about his former students, listen to his stories about teaching high school English for 37 years, and even brought him books of poetry from the local library during her off hours. The memory care unit presented unique challenges that tested even experienced caregivers. Patients with dementia and Alzheimer's could become agitated, confused, or frightened without warning. Destiny had developed techniques for de-escalation that seemed almost magical to her colleagues. Her voice carried a natural soothing quality, and she possessed an endless reservoir of patience for questions asked repeatedly and instructions that needed constant repetition. Janet Williams, whose mother had late-stage Alzheimer's, later wrote in a letter to Pine Forest's administration that Destiny was the only person who could calm her mother during episodes of severe confusion. She would hold my mother's hand and speak to her like she was the most important person in the world, Janet wrote. Even when my mother couldn't remember her own name, Destiny made her feel safe. Beyond her technical skills and compassionate nature, Destiny had quietly become the emotional backbone of her unit. New employees sought her guidance, not just for clinical procedures, but for coping with the emotional weight of working with vulnerable populations. She had a way of helping rookie CNAs understand that feeling overwhelmed was normal, that crying after a particularly difficult shift didn't make them weak, and that finding joy in small victories was essential for survival in their profession. Her dreams extended beyond her current role. Destiny had been saving money to pursue her RN license, with long-term aspirations of specializing in geriatric care. She often spoke about wanting to develop programs that would improve quality of life for elderly patients, particularly those dealing with isolation and depression. Her vision included creating therapeutic activities that would stimulate cognitive function while providing meaningful social interaction. Weekends often found Destiny volunteering at community health fairs, providing blood pressure screenings and basic health education to underserved populations. She believed healthcare was a human right, not a privilege, and used her own time to extend care beyond the walls of Pine Forest. Her personal mission seemed to be ensuring that no one felt forgotten or invisible, regardless of their age, economic status, or mental capacity. Her colleagues would later remember how Destiny could transform the atmosphere of an entire shift. During mandatory overtime on holidays, when staff morale typically plummeted, she somehow managed to maintain team spirit. She brought homemade cookies for night shifts, organized small celebrations for residents' birthdays, and created a bulletin board featuring photos and updates from families, small gestures that reminded everyone why their work mattered. The respect Destiny commanded wasn't limited to her professional environment. Families of residents frequently requested her specifically for difficult procedures or sensitive conversations. They trusted her judgment, valued her input, and often sought her advice on care decisions. For many, she became more than a healthcare provider. She was a bridge between the clinical world of medical treatment and the deeply personal experience of watching a loved one age or recover. Her commitment to excellence never wavered, even during personal struggles that her coworkers could only guess at. She maintained her standards of care, her gentle demeanor, and her unwavering dedication to making each patient feel valued and respected. That dedication would be remembered by everyone whose life she touched, creating a legacy that extended far beyond her 27 years. Samuel Coleman was 29 years old when he first met Destiny Stewart, but his life experiences had aged him beyond his years in ways that weren't immediately apparent. On the surface, he possessed a charm that could disarm even skeptical observers. He was tall, well-spoken when he chose to be, and had a smile that could convince you he was someone worth knowing. But beneath that exterior lay a complicated history that would eventually consume everything in its path. His criminal record told a story of poor decisions and escalating consequences. What started with minor infractions during his teenage years had grown into more serious offenses by his early 20s. Theft, assault, drug-related charges, each conviction adding another layer to a pattern that suggested someone who struggled with impulse control and respect for boundaries. The details of his past weren't secrets exactly, but they were facts he preferred to minimize when meeting new people. When Samuel and Destiny's paths crossed 3 years earlier, she was already established in her career and financially independent. He, on the other hand, was between jobs, between apartments, and between phases of his life that never seemed to stabilize for long. Their initial attraction was genuine. She was drawn to what seemed like vulnerability beneath his tough exterior, while he was captivated by her stability and success. The early months of their relationship followed a predictable pattern. Samuel would find temporary employment, make promises about getting his life together, and demonstrate just enough progress to maintain Destiny's hope that he could change. But these periods of improvement never lasted. Jobs would end abruptly, usually due to conflicts with supervisors or unexplained absences. Bills would go unpaid, and gradually, subtly, Destiny found herself covering more and more of their shared expenses. What began as occasional help with rent money evolved into something more comprehensive. Samuel's transportation was unreliable, so Destiny began driving him to job interviews and work sites. His phone service would get disconnected, so she added him to her plan. When his clothes became worn or inappropriate for employment, she provided money for new ones. Each individual expense seemed reasonable, even generous, but together they created a financial dependency that became increasingly difficult to break. Samuel had developed an almost artistic ability to present his needs as temporary emergencies rather than ongoing patterns. A medical bill that couldn't wait, a fine that needed immediate payment to avoid jail time, a job opportunity that required upfront investment for tools or uniforms. Destiny, with her natural inclination to help others, found herself repeatedly reaching into her savings to solve problems that somehow never stayed solved. Their friends and family began to notice the imbalance. Destiny's relatives questioned why she was always paying when they went out to dinner, or why Samuel never seemed to contribute to household expenses despite living in her apartment. Her coworkers observed that she'd stopped participating in social activities that cost money, often citing financial concerns, despite her steady income and previously responsible spending habits. The emotional dynamics of their relationship had become equally unbalanced. Samuel's moods were unpredictable, swinging between gratitude and resentment, often within the same conversation. He would express appreciation for Destiny's support, then criticize her for making him feel dependent. He spoke frequently about his plans to pay her back, to become the provider he believed she deserved, but those plans remained consistently theoretical. His jealousy had intensified over time, particularly regarding her professional success. While he struggled to maintain steady employment, Destiny continued to excel in her career, earning praise from supervisors and genuine affection from patients and colleagues. Rather than feeling proud of her accomplishments, Samuel seemed to view them as implicit criticism of his own failures. Arguments became more frequent and more intense. Samuel would accuse Destiny of looking down on him, of using her financial contributions to control him, of believing she was better than he was. When she tried to address their relationship problems constructively, he would deflect by bringing up everything she'd done for him, making her feel guilty for even raising concerns. His response to stress had become increasingly concerning. When job searches didn't yield results, when legal problems resurfaced, when financial pressures mounted, Samuel's anger would build until it found outlets that left Destiny walking on eggshells in her own home. He never directed physical violence toward her, but his capacity for verbal aggression and property destruction created an atmosphere of tension that exhausted her emotional reserves. The breaking point came gradually, then all at once. Destiny realized she'd been living two completely different lives: the confident, capable professional who thrived at Pine Forest, and the woman who'd somehow become responsible for managing another adult's basic survival. The contrast became impossible to ignore. Friends later recalled conversations where Destiny expressed feeling trapped by her own compassion. She worried about what would happen to Samuel if she withdrew her support, but she also recognized that her help wasn't actually helping him develop independence or responsibility. The relationship had become a cycle where her success enabled his stagnation, and his stagnation demanded more of her success. The decision to end their marriage wasn't impulsive. Destiny had spent months considering her options, seeking advice from trusted friends, and trying to imagine a future where things improved. But eventually, she concluded that some problems couldn't be solved by good intentions and financial support. Some people had to want to change, and Samuel's actions consistently contradicted his words about transformation. When she finally told him their marriage was over, Samuel's reaction exceeded even her worst expectations. The man who'd spent 3 years accepting her generosity suddenly couldn't accept her autonomy. Complex relationships can trap us in cycles that seem impossible to break. What are your thoughts on recognizing red flags when someone's past behavior predicts their future actions? Let us know in the comments below. And if you're finding this deep dive into human psychology and criminal behavior compelling, make sure to subscribe to Truly Criminal Network for more investigative content that goes beyond the headlines. The shift at Pine Forest Health and Rehabilitation progressed exactly as Destiny had hoped. Room 14's Mrs. Chen had finally managed her physical therapy exercises without assistance, a breakthrough that had taken weeks to achieve. Room 22's Mr. Rodriguez had eaten his entire lunch without prompting. The first time in days his appetite had returned since his stroke. These small victories were the moments that reminded Destiny why she'd chosen this profession. By 2:30 p.m., the afternoon medication rounds were complete, and the facility had settled into its usual post-lunch rhythm. Residents napped in their rooms while others gathered in the common area for the daily word puzzle activity. Destiny was finishing her documentation when Linda, the charge nurse, mentioned that family members would be visiting room 18 around 4 p.m. Could she make sure Mr. Thompson was presentable and comfortable? Of course, Destiny replied, closing the medication cart with her characteristic attention to detail. She glanced at the clock on the wall, calculating how much time she had to complete her remaining tasks before the end of her shift. Her replacement wouldn't arrive until 6 p.m., but she wanted everything properly organized for the transition. The afternoon sun streamed through the facility's windows as Destiny made her final rounds, checking on residents who required closer monitoring. Room 31's Mrs. Patterson seemed more alert than usual, even managing a conversation about her late husband's garden. Room 17's Mr. Washington asked about his evening medications, a positive sign that his confusion was decreasing. At 4:45 p.m., Destiny began gathering her personal belongings from her locker in the staff area. Her shift had been particularly satisfying. No medical emergencies, no family complaints, and several small but meaningful improvements in patient conditions. She tucked her stethoscope into her bag, collected her car keys, and said goodbye to colleagues who were staying for the evening shift. The employee parking lot behind Pine Forest was never busy during shift changes. Most day staff left by 3 p.m., while evening employees typically arrived closer to 5:30 p.m. Destiny appreciated the quiet transition time. It gave her a few minutes to decompress before driving home. She walked toward her car, mentally planning her evening routine. She was fishing her keys from her bag when she heard footsteps approaching from behind. The sound made her pause, not because footsteps in a parking lot were unusual, but because something about the pace and rhythm seemed familiar. When she turned around, her heart stopped. Samuel was walking toward her with purposeful strides, his face set in an expression she'd seen too many times before. The expression that meant he'd made a decision and wouldn't be persuaded otherwise. The expression that had preceded their worst arguments, their most destructive conversations. "We need to talk," he said, his voice carrying the edge she'd learned to fear. Destiny's mind raced through possibilities. How had he known where to find her? How long had he been waiting? More importantly, how could she de-escalate whatever confrontation he'd come to create? "Samuel, I'm at work," she said, keeping her voice steady. "This isn't the place." "You don't get to decide that anymore," he replied, stepping closer. "You don't get to decide anything anymore." The parking lot felt impossibly isolated despite being adjacent to a building full of people. Destiny glanced toward the employee entrance, calculating distance and time. Could she reach the door before he reached her? Should she scream and hope someone inside would hear? "Whatever you want to say, we can discuss it later," she tried, backing toward her car. "I need to get home." Samuel's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Home? You mean the place you kicked me out of? The place where you decided you were too good for me?" The conversation was escalating exactly as Destiny had feared it would. Samuel's anger was building with each word, and she recognized the signs of someone who'd moved beyond rational discussion. His hands were clenched at his sides, his jaw tight with rage. "I never said I was too good for anyone," Destiny replied, reaching for her car door handle. "I just said we couldn't keep what? Keep me around? Keep supporting a loser? Keep pretending you cared?" The accusation stung because it was so far from the truth. Destiny had cared, perhaps too much, for too long, but caring hadn't been enough to fix what was broken in their relationship. "That's not fair, and you know it," she said, finally finding anger of her own. "I supported you for 3 years. I believed in you when nobody else would. But I can't save someone who won't save himself." Those words she'd been holding back for months, seemed to trigger something in Samuel that she'd never seen before. His face transformed from anger to something much more dangerous, something final. He reached into his jacket pocket, and Destiny's world changed forever. The gunshots echoed across the parking lot like thunder, sharp and definitive. The first struck Destiny in the chest, sending her stumbling backward against her car. The second found its mark before she could even process what was happening. The third was unnecessary, but Samuel fired it anyway. As Destiny collapsed beside her vehicle, Samuel turned the weapon on himself. The fourth gunshot was muffled, but no less final. Inside Pine Forest Health and Rehabilitation, the staff initially thought the sounds were construction noise from a nearby site. It wasn't until a delivery driver arrived 5 minutes later and began screaming for help that anyone realized what had occurred in their parking lot. Emergency services arrived to find 2 bodies and no survivors. The woman who had spent her morning bringing comfort to others had died alone on the asphalt. The man who had claimed to love her had ensured they would both be remembered for violence, rather than the lives they'd actually lived. By 5:30 p.m., the parking lot was a crime scene. By 6 p.m., the news had reached Destiny's family. By 7 p.m., Pine Forest was closed to visitors while investigators documented the scene. March 21, 2025 had started as a day of hope and possibility. It ended as a tragedy that would haunt everyone who knew them. Detective Johnson had investigated domestic violence cases for over 15 years, but murder-suicides presented unique challenges that never became routine. When he arrived at Pine Forest Health and Rehabilitation at 5:47 p.m., the scene was already secured by patrol officers who had responded to the initial 911 call. Unlike traditional homicide investigations where the perpetrator's identity remained unknown, Johnson knew immediately that this case would focus on documentation rather than detection. The first priority was establishing a timeline. The delivery driver who discovered the bodies, Kevin from Allied Medical Supply, had arrived for his scheduled 5:15 p.m. drop-off. His route sheet showed he'd been running approximately 10 minutes behind schedule that day, a delay that meant he'd arrived during the immediate aftermath rather than witnessing the actual shooting. Kevin's statement was consistent and detailed. He'd parked his truck near the employee entrance and immediately noticed 2 people lying beside a white Honda Civic. His first thought was that someone had suffered a medical emergency, which explained why he'd approached the scene calling for help rather than immediately recognizing it as a crime scene. Inside the facility, staff members provided crucial information about the timeline. Linda, the charge nurse, confirmed that Destiny had finished her shift at the usual time, completing all required documentation before gathering her belongings. Security cameras inside the building showed her leaving through the employee exit at exactly 4:47 p.m., just 2 minutes before the first gunshots were heard. The parking lot itself lacked security cameras, but investigators discovered that a business across Forest Avenue had exterior monitoring that captured partial views of the Pine Forest employee parking area. The footage, though distant and somewhat obscured, showed Samuel's arrival approximately 20 minutes before the shooting occurred. This evidence contradicted the theory of a spontaneous confrontation. Samuel hadn't simply appeared in the parking lot by chance or followed Destiny impulsively after work. The timing suggested premeditation. He'd been waiting, watching, planning his approach for the moment when Destiny would be most vulnerable. Ballistics analysis revealed that Samuel had used a .38 caliber revolver, a weapon that investigators later traced through purchase records. The gun had been legally acquired from a licensed dealer in Jackson 6 months earlier, during a period when Samuel's criminal record didn't disqualify him from firearm ownership. This discovery raised questions about background check procedures and the time gaps that allow purchases between convictions. The physical evidence at the scene painted a clear picture of the shooting sequence. Shell casings and blood spatter patterns confirmed that Destiny had been standing beside her car when the first shot was fired. The angle of entry wounds indicated she'd been facing Samuel directly, suggesting they'd been engaged in conversation rather than her attempting to flee. Forensic analysis of Destiny's wounds revealed that any of the 3 shots would have been fatal. The grouping and placement suggested Samuel had maintained close proximity throughout the shooting, approximately 6 feet away, according to powder burn evidence. This proximity supported witness accounts of hearing voices before the gunshots, confirming that a conversation had preceded the violence. Samuel's self-inflicted gunshot wound showed classic characteristics of suicide by firearm. The weapon was found in his right hand, consistent with his documented right-handedness. Residue patterns on his clothing and skin confirmed he'd fired all shots, eliminating any possibility of third-party involvement. Investigators interviewed approximately 30 people during the first 48 hours, including family members, coworkers, and neighbors. These conversations revealed a pattern of escalating conflict in the weeks leading up to March 21st. Multiple sources confirmed that Destiny had recently ended the relationship and that Samuel had struggled to accept this decision. Most significantly, investigators discovered that Samuel had made several attempts to contact Destiny in the days before the shooting. Phone records showed 13 missed calls to her cell phone during the week of March 15th through 21st. Text message recovery revealed increasingly desperate and angry communications that Destiny had not responded to. Coworkers provided insight into Destiny's state of mind during her final weeks. Several staff members noted that she'd seemed happier and more relaxed recently, but also mentioned that she'd expressed concerns about Samuel's reaction to their separation. She'd never indicated feeling physically threatened, but had worried about his ability to accept the end of their relationship. The investigation also examined whether Pine Forest had adequate security measures for employee safety. The facility's policies required staff to sign out when leaving, but didn't include escorts to parking areas or enhanced lighting in employee zones. These findings would later influence security upgrades at healthcare facilities throughout Jackson. Within 72 hours, investigators had assembled a comprehensive timeline of events, complete with forensic evidence, witness statements, and background information. The case file documented not just what happened on March 21st, but the circumstances that led to that tragic confrontation. Unlike investigations where questions remain unanswered for months or years, this case provided clear evidence of motive, means, and opportunity. Samuel's actions, while devastating, left little ambiguity about his intentions or methods. The investigation concluded that Destiny Stewart had been murdered by her estranged husband, who subsequently took his own life in what authorities classified as a domestic violence murder-suicide. The efficiency of the investigation, while professionally satisfying, did nothing to diminish the tragedy of its conclusions. 2 lives had been lost in a parking lot behind a place dedicated to healing, leaving families and communities to grapple with questions that evidence alone could never answer. The news of Destiny Stewart's death spread through Jackson's tight-knit healthcare community like wildfire. By evening on March 21st, nurses, CNAs, and healthcare workers from facilities across the city had learned that one of their own had been murdered in her workplace parking lot. The response was immediate and heartfelt. Flowers began appearing outside Pine Forest Health and Rehabilitation before the sun set that day. Within hours of the tragedy, an online memorial appeared on Gun Memorial, a website dedicated to remembering victims of gun violence. What started as a simple tribute quickly grew into something extraordinary. Over the following weeks, 270 virtual candles were lit in Destiny's honor by people from around the world who had been touched by her story. Each candle represented someone who felt compelled to acknowledge her life and mourn her senseless death. The tributes revealed the depth of impact Destiny had made during her 27 years. Former patients, families shared stories of her kindness during their most difficult moments. Coworkers described a woman who had consistently gone above and beyond her duties, often staying late to comfort a distressed resident or arriving early to help with challenging cases. Friends from nursing school recalled her infectious optimism and unwavering belief that she could make a difference in the world. Pine Forest Health and Rehabilitation faced the unprecedented challenge of helping both staff and residents process the loss. Many elderly patients had formed genuine bonds with Destiny, and explaining her sudden absence proved emotionally devastating for everyone involved. The facility brought in grief counselors and temporarily suspended normal activities while the community began to heal. Destiny's family channeled their grief into action almost immediately. Her mother, Patricia Stewart, became a vocal advocate for domestic violence prevention programs in Mississippi. Speaking at community forums and church gatherings, Patricia shared her daughter's story while emphasizing that domestic violence affects families across all economic and social boundaries. Her message was clear: Destiny's death could not be in vain if it prevented even one person from suffering a similar fate. The tragedy prompted significant policy discussions throughout Jackson's healthcare sector. Facility administrators began reevaluating employee safety protocols, particularly for staff working evening and night shifts. Enhanced lighting in parking areas, Security escorts for employees leaving after dark and improved communication systems became standard topics at administrative meetings. Local news outlets, including WLBT, WJTV, and the Clarion Ledger, covered not just the immediate tragedy, but its broader implications for the community. Their reporting highlighted gaps in domestic violence resources and the need for better support systems for individuals attempting to leave abusive relationships. The coverage kept Destiny's story in the public consciousness while educating readers about available resources and intervention strategies. Educational initiatives emerged from the tragedy as well. Nursing programs at local colleges began incorporating domestic violence awareness into their curricula, teaching future healthcare workers to identify signs of abuse among both patients and colleagues. These programs emphasize that healthcare workers, despite their training in caring for others, are not immune to becoming victims themselves. Community vigils became a regular occurrence in the months following March 21st. Held in parks and community centers throughout Jackson, these gatherings served multiple purposes: honoring Destiny's memory, raising awareness about domestic violence, and providing support for other survivors. The vigils featured speakers from advocacy organizations, law enforcement, and healthcare professionals who emphasized that help was available for those trapped in dangerous relationships. Perhaps most significantly, Destiny's death catalyzed the formation of the Mississippi Healthcare Workers Safety Coalition, an organization dedicated to protecting healthcare employees from workplace violence. The coalition advocates for stronger security measures at medical facilities and provides resources for workers facing threats or harassment from patients, family members, or personal relationships. The Gun Memorial tribute to Destiny continues to grow, with new candles lit regularly by people who discover her story online. Comments left by visitors reflect a global recognition that her death represents more than a single tragedy. It symbolizes the ongoing crisis of domestic violence that affects communities everywhere. Destiny's former nursing school created a scholarship in her name, awarded annually to students who demonstrate exceptional compassion in patient care. The scholarship ensures that her commitment to dignified healthcare will continue through future generations of nurses who share her values and dedication. Today, Destiny Stewart is remembered not as a victim, but as a young woman whose life embodied the very best of human compassion. Her legacy lives on through policy changes, educational programs, and memorial scholarships that honor her belief in the power of caring for others. While her death was a senseless tragedy, her life serves as an enduring reminder that kindness, dedication, and love can create lasting change, even after someone is gone. Destiny's story reminds us why awareness and action matter in preventing domestic violence. If this case has moved you, please share this video to help spread awareness about available resources and support systems. Hit the like button to honor Destiny's memory, and let us know in the comments how we can all work together to protect vulnerable individuals in our communities. Your engagement helps ensure that stories like Destiny's reach people who need to hear them most.